Welcome to 10.8. 10.8 is a more personal and journal-style series of articles by myself that will center around police management, criminology, and policing. The articles will not be the typical citation-driven essay style that I use. For those articles, please see my Medium page, published books such as Amazon, especially The Business of Policing, Volume 1, Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century, or scientific published literature highlighted by The Business of Policing, Volume 2, Managing Ethical Police Conduct. Here I will post frequent thought streams on my personal philosophies. Thanks for listening in. Investigating YouTube's restrictions on science, Part 1. I am very excited that my YouTube channel just got monetized. Putting my library through the censorship filters is an experiment I have been impatiently waiting for. I went through the policies that YouTube sent me, and with the complaints that I have heard about the YouTube process and Google writ large, I was a little surprised to see that the policies are rather straightforward. They have some problems, but those problems are right on the surface, and we will explore some of them. The YouTube policies. A significant portion of the advertising restrictions does not apply to my content. I do no sexually explicit content. I do curse, but very rarely in anything serious. I do no harmful or dangerous acts. I create the opposite of hateful content. No drugs, no tobacco, no promotion of firearms. Though I can get the logic, these restrictions make very little sense in comparison to what is common in mainstream media. A sexually suggestive ad of a southern girl in cut-off denim shorts shooting a rifle that is actually for Coors would surprise no one during the Super Bowl. Though it is easy to blame YouTube, and to a certain extent I do, at the core of these restrictions is being quote-unquote advertiser-friendly. These advertisers must be having a say in wanting these restrictions. For example, the following two restrictions exist. Videos that contain graphic violence in the context of physical altercations, public demonstrations, or police brutality. Additionally, raw footage of war casualties with graphic depictions of injury or death. This is a clear double standard. Mainstream media has been if it bleeds, it leads, as long as I have been alive. As far as my observations of the YouTube community, the YouTubers are nearly always attempting to provide commentary on clips from mainstream and local media. On the second point, the History Channel is principally existed upon raw footage and discussion of war. That is fine for advertising, but not for individual experts discussing those same topics. I suppose the one that stood out to me the most reminded me of the weird warnings that appear on some items. Whenever I see an odd warning, I imagine, what happened that caused this warning label to be required? I mean, something happened. Someone did this ridiculous act. I still shake my head thinking that they added pimple popping or ingrown toenail removal to the restricted list. I'm aware it happens. I suppose the controversial issues clause is where they can really get me. And here that clause is. Read it verbatim for you. Controversial issues refers to topics that may be unsettling for our users and are often the result of human tragedy. Let's start that all over. Controversial issues refers to topics that may be unsettling for our users and are often the result of human tragedy. A sensitive event is usually an unforeseen event in which there has been a loss of life, typically as a result of a pre-planned malicious attack. Sensitive events can cause a mournful response from the public or, at times, an extreme or visceral reaction. An event must be relatively recent if it's going to be considered a sensitive event. Context is important, and for instance, content that provides authoritative news reporting on a sensitive issue or documentary videos about a historic event may be eligible for monetization. This policy applies even if the content is purely commentary or contains no graphic imagery. Child abuse, pedophilia, child marriage, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, self-harm, suicide, eating disorder, domestic abuse, abortion, bullying, sensitive events, atrocious acts that result in the loss of human lives, such as mass shootings, armed conflict, death, tragic events, and terrorist attacks or acts. Under this standard, for all practical reality, this completely silences the science of human events outside of the mainstream narrative. Let's look at some of the words that they went through there. Authoritative news. Who determines authoritative? May be eligible. Who determines the may? I don't know how we get around that. This is especially so for those scientists attempting to save human lives who must discuss these things to explore them. There would be harm to historians as well. The narratives that have brought history knowledge to millions of people, such as Dan Carlin's work, hinge on being implicitly approved by YouTube's corporate ideology. These rules are ripe for bias and selective enforcement. It is people like me with actual credibility that will be silenced while ignorant pundits will be promoted. What is not allowed? I have heard many complaints about the type of content that is not allowed. And by not allowed, I mean not allowed on at all, not just restricted. But I did not see anything that stood out unreasonable, and it does not contain nearly as much as of the subjective terminology found in the advertising guideline. So what was restricted? Now, after reviewing the YouTube policies, let's take a look at what was restricted after submitting my library to the YouTube filters. The following are what is restricted by YouTube as of right now. The police union's unwavering support of President Trump. This is a video and article that is purely educational and contains no foul language. The best I can tell is that there may be an inability to discuss human trafficking in the automatic filter. Apparently, being a subject matter expert is irrelevant, and it is hard to not see this as a political issue. But then again, a video I did on investigating a Trump and MAGA rally was allowed, and it paints a more positive picture and image of the president than the banned one does. I think things like this video are an example of how we can see bias when there isn't much evidence for one. A manual review was requested of this. Next is the archive, 60-minute Crutcher commentary part 1. I'm unsure of why this has triggered it. I will review and report the follow-up to this article. But this is just me and another PhD discussing the events of our particular subject matter around Terrence McCrutcher and Betty Shelby incident in the Tulsa Police Department. Next, 10-8 episode, Neo-Racism, the Evolution of the Racist. Another video and article that is educational. Maybe they are considering the discussion of race as controversial. Obviously, that is problematic and going to have a lot of bias in which is allowed and which isn't. A manual review was requested of this one. Next, 10-8's Defund the Police and Human Trafficking. Another educational and news analysis from a subject matter expert in video and article form. This is where I'm assuming that human trafficking draws an immediate flag. Read these articles for yourself and watch the video, and you will see this is clearly educational material. A manual review was requested. Next, Police in 2020, UCAS Studios interviews Dr. Michael Wood Jr. This is an interview of a subject matter expert in policing for educational purposes. I will have to re-listen to this to see if there's a language issue. You have police reform all wrong. A reporter interviews Dr. Michael Wood Jr. This is another interview of me for being a subject matter expert in police management and was conducted by a widely read German reporter. This is authoritative news, literally. I know there were by their definition, I know there were no language issues with this one, and a manual review was again requested. Next, Dr. Michael Wood Jr.'s appearance on Whiskey Congress to discuss the state of policing. Due to the nature of this podcast, I will say this is reasonable. Next, No Justice, No Peace, Nuance Science Stream, and School Police Nuance Science Stream with Michael Wood Jr. These videos are straightforward scientific discussions with clear educational purposes. And here is the description. Nuance is a multi-format educational presentation that fights through the noise to discuss social sciences and the application of them. During this special live session, you can watch the creation of the program and ask questions for honest and civil discussion on the sciences and state of policing in these United States with a police management scholar, retired Baltimore drug cop, and U.S. Marine Corps anti-terrorism veteran. Watching live is likely to have a weird pauses, garbled words, embarrassing mishaps, and good music breaks. Ask your question and we will work through the nuance and arguments together. Unquote. A manual review was requested for both of these videos. Next, let's clear the air on the Electoral College, equity, and capitalism. Another article and video that is a scientific discussion from an educator directly. Another manual review was requested. Next, a civilized gun control debate. Armageddon must be near. The following is a description of this video. Yeah, I know. Impossible, right? It actually took place. A civilized, mature, and intellectually honest debate over gun control in these United States. Fellow Arizonan Jordan McManus and I sit down in the hopes of advancing the discussion on the value of our American gun culture. I believe we succeeded. You be the judge. The topics and questions include: what does the Second Amendment mean? Can we really fight the government? Are wars won or lost by violence? What does well-regulated mean? Who comprises the militia? Who would lead and control the revolution? The Bureau of Land Management and Bundy's versus Standing Rock Sioux. Does it make sense to change the law or obeying the police? Who can and cannot obtain guns? And is it all worth it? Well, I suppose YouTube is being honest. No discussion of firearms is allowed, which directly means no discussion of the Second Amendment. What is very frustrating, though, is that my second appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience included a discussion on gun control, firearms, the Second Amendment, race and policing, and more. But we all know that episode was not restricted for the peer preferred partner Joe Rogan. This is just one of the innumerable examples of the selective enforcement of these standards. And just to be clear, this means that Joe Rogan Experience got paid significantly, at least tens of thousands of dollars, for the nearly 3 million views and 5.5 hours of discussion. But when I discuss those very same topics on my own, I am restricted. Next. One cop to another. Jamaica SWAT and Baltimore PD. Nuance interview episode 4. The following is a description of this podcast. One cop to another, as American police whistleblower and scholar Michael Wood Jr. interviews Jamaican Constabulary Force, SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics, Constable Miguel Wallace. In this unifying discussion, Michael and Miguel touch on growing up in Jamaica, Jehovah's Witnesses, why people become police, what good can a cop do, what is right, the golden rule, seeing through the matrix, the purpose of policing, and more. There may be some language issues with this one, but this is two experts having an educational, informative discussion at Westfield State University. Next, police, crime, violence, and more. Nuance interviews Last Born in the Wilderness, episode 3. Another subject matter interview. I'm wondering if there's something about keywords just in the title. There has to be something logical here, right? And finally, one of the most egregious examples, science delivered directly to the consumer, restricted. What causes crime and what the police do about it, with Michael Wood Jr. I'm a leading subject matter scholar, expert in this field. This is another article and video trying to educate the public. Maybe it violates standards, but like in nudity and art, there must be an exception for public education and science. Right? I will follow up on what I learned and what results from the manual reviews. And it's probably a battle that science has been fighting for a long time. Social science is about philosophizing on the extremes and challenging any accepted thought. Science is a collection of things that are not true. Any scientific consensus is the antithesis of science. See you next time.